What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is the lovely, wonderful Dr. MC McDonald. MC, thank you for joining me once again.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
So we're going to talk about, and I'm excited for a few reasons. One, I love you in a very platonic way, and two, you and I. So what we're going to cover today is narrative therapy. You and I went through that exercise on a few occasions. Was very grateful for that, and it was really helpful. But it also, going through that process for me, I was very transparent about who I was, and you still decided to come back to the show, even knowing my shit. So thank you.
Of course.
So let's just jump right into this. What is narrative therapy?
So I think sometimes when we're talking about therapy, we think we're talking about narrative therapy in general. In some sense, when you're in therapy at all, you are telling a story. And so you could say that all therapeutic modalities are narrative in some sense. But narrative therapy is a specific modality that was created in the 80s by David Epstein and Michael White. They wrote an amazing book called Narrative Means to Therapeutic Ends, which I would highly recommend. Even if you're not a clinician, it's an easy read and it gives you kind of a great background of how they came to create that modality. Basically, it's a therapy that centers around the idea that the individual is the author of your life. And so while we cannot control things that happen to us, obviously, these are external circumstances, we can have some control over the stories we tell about ourselves and our identity and our experiences. And this is an incredibly important tool because this is where we find empowerment in the things that we didn't have control over happening, right? So when something terrible happens to you, you can't control that it happened, but you can control the story that you tell. So the goal in general of narrative therapy is to kind of help the individual separate themselves and their identity from the problem. So the hope is that you'd see the issues as sort of external to your core identity rather than who you are, which can help give you a fresh perspective and change everything and give you more possibilities for action. In the modality, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just one more thing. So it's also kind of a cool modality because the therapist and the client are collaborators. They're writing a story. Epstein and White call this reauthoring. And so the therapist will help guide the client explore alternative narratives that are maybe more empowering and reflective of their true selves versus the sort of victim stories that we sometimes get caught in.
So this is it's a fascinating topic and a fascinating modality. So what type of issue, we'll say, would this be best used for? Is it self-esteem? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Like what are the issues that would, if you would want to check this particular therapy out?
I mean, it's sort of it's going to be kind of an annoying answer. I don't think there's a problem that narrative therapy isn't suited for. I think if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with anxiety, I think we are all telling ourselves stories and we are not conscious of the fact that we are authoring those stories. And so, to use the example of divorce, I see so many clients, I'm sure you see so many people in your community and in your life who have this thing happen to them. Let's say maybe they're blindsided and they tell themselves a story that so here's this thing that happened. I didn't, control it. It happened to me. It feels like it happened to me. And it's proof that I'm not enough or that I'm not worthy of love or that I don't deserve love. I shouldn't be a partner. I'm not a good partner. I'm not good enough. And so when you use narrative therapy with that, you can create a little bit of space because that's an interpretation. It's not a fact. It's just a story. And if you tell yourself a different story, that can radically change the way you feel about the thing that happened. And then also it can radically change the way you behave in the world, in your other relationships, in your dating future, all that kind of thing.
So some of these events and these things that happen,
Mm-hmm.
almost reinforce, because isn't it more, I mean, it's certainly about perspective and all that kind of stuff, right? In terms of events like a divorce or a breakup or a job loss, but isn't it really, don't those events reinforce the core story that I am not enough, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
isn't that sort of the real goal of narrative therapy, is to change that story more than changing the perspective of the event?
Yes, but I think you have to start with the event that is
Okay.
caught, that is bringing the symptom up now, because sometimes there's a core story and sometimes there's not a core story. Sometimes the core story just got developed via the divorce, right? So let's say you might have thought you were really good communicator and good at relationships, and then you get divorced, and all of a sudden, one of the reasons that's so shattering is because it throws all of the things you thought you knew about yourself into question. And you create this sort of binary where it's like, okay, well, if everything that I used to believe didn't work in this situation, then none of that must be true. And so now I start telling myself this really live, vivid story about how I, am bad at relationships and I was always wrong about myself. Right. So, and then other times it's that, you didn't get what you needed in childhood. So you've got some attachment stuff, some abandonment stuff, and then the divorce feeds right into that story that feels like a fact about your identity because you no longer, it's been around for so long, you no longer see it as a story. It just feels like reality.
And can you, so I'm thinking of a specific person, a guy that's in my group. I'm not going to name names or get too specific here, but he's distraught, obviously. He went through a
Sure.
divorce. It's been a few years. He's trying to do the work on himself. He's also
Mhm.
trying to date, and I don't know the particulars of that in terms of time frame and how much work did he do on himself before he dove
Mhm.
in. And so now the story is, I can't do anything right. I can't get a date. I work
Mhm.
too much. How does that guy, first of all, does he need to start with the divorce story and change that a little bit in terms of, it was bad communication on both of our
Mhm.
parts. I worked too much, and she didn't communicate, or I
Mhm.
was hurt by things and I didn't communicate. Does he start there, or does
Mhm.
he have to go sort of, because I feel like his journey, he keeps reinforcing this story that he is just, he's not a good person. Like
Mhm.
he's not
Right.
worthy of love. And so
Right.
so where does he start?
So, I mean, I think this kind of comes down there, it's a matter of preference, right? I personally, if I was working with that person, I would start in the now because these are the things that we can usually work with a little bit easier because number one, they just happened, and two, they tend to be a little
Okay.
bit less loaded. And so I would say, okay, tell me the most recent relationship fail, right? You went online, you swiped right or left or however you swipe to get a match, and the person didn't match you back. What is the story that comes right out of that failure? And it's usually like one or two sentences. I am not attractive. Nobody will find me interesting, right? Whatever that is. And you write down that one sentence. And then you write down four other possible explanations for that sentence to be happening. This is a tool called Four Versions, which is in chapter 1 of my book Unbroken that came out last year. Um, and you don't have to believe those versions. They can be wild and out of control. You can say this person didn't match me back or didn't message me because they got abducted by aliens. They didn't match me back because they got lost in the woods. They didn't
Right.
match me back because they started dating someone else and forgot to turn off their profile on the app. They didn't match me back because they're so wildly attracted to me that they are nervous about it, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
any of these things. And again, you don't have to believe the stories. The point is that you write them out and you see that there are other possible explanations than the one singular explanation that you're telling yourself. That creates enough space, a little tiny bit of breathing room around what's happening for you to start to get in there and say, okay, maybe, just maybe, it's not that I am unworthy of love. And then from there, once you do that with a couple of smaller things, and you're used to the tool and you're used to this idea of sort of reshaping a story, because we don't really do that. People tend to be really uncomfortable with this idea at the start. Then I think you can jump into like, okay, let's look at the divorce. How can we retell that story in a way that is a little bit more fair?
So can we keep going down the road with this example? So
Sure.
so we write four things and then we
Yep.
we allow some space for maybe it's not
Mhm.
that I'm a terrible person. What's the next step then in the process?
So the next step is to figure out how those stories land in your body because our mind and body are in a dynamic unity. They're not completely separate. The story that you're telling yourself is impacting the way you feel in your body, which is then impacting your behavior in the world. And this is critically important when you're in the dating world, because if you don't see that, then you're creating dynamics out in the world that you're not aware of. And those dynamics are likely getting in the way of your dating success.
So are we talking things like posture, confidence, like how you portray
Yeah,
yourself in the world is affected by these negative stories, right?
absolutely.
And then
Yes.
and then it perpetuates that you
Mhm.
can't you
Right.
you won't change your story because you haven't
Mhm.
acknowledged that pretty large piece.
Totally. So you go out on a date and you're feeling like, oh God, I don't know what this person is doing with me. They're out of my league. This is terrible, right? Like, oh God, what am I going to say next? I'm not interesting. I shouldn't have done this. This tape is rolling in your head. That's affecting your body language. It's affecting the cadence of your voice. It's affecting all of these things that the person that you're out to dinner with is reading those with their own interpretation of failure. Oh, this guy swiped right, but he's like, he seemed super enthusiastic when we were texting. Now he is like, clearly there's some issue here. It must be me. And then that date is a fail because of both of your interpretations, not the actual facts. And that's just obviously one way to tell it. But I think we have no idea how we appear to other people. And that's super important. Okay, so
Yeah.
going back
Yeah.
to the story. Wait, so what was the question? You said continue with the
Yeah. So after you sort of start working and
Mhm.
recognizing what it's doing to your body, what's the next step?
Oh, yes. Okay. So when you tell the stories, this is actually a really fun moment with clients usually when you start telling these different versions of the story and cluing into how they feel in your body, the the big bad story, the terrible story that you're a failure hits in your body like a stressor, right? It's going to create tension. It's going to create anxiety. You might feel tightness in your chest. Your heart might race. All of these things start to happen because of that story. When you tell an absurd story, right, that, somebody got captured by a UFO, that will feel really different in your body. And then when you tell, usually kind of a middle of the line story comes out where it's like, I tried my best, the other person tried their best, it didn't work out. That is tragically sad and I'm ready to start dating again. And you'll find that that version feels like peace.
Hmm.
And when you find those versions, those are the ones to sort of go to and strengthen. So as you keep working with those little stories about the little failures, then you can go to the divorce and say, okay, how does the story feel in your body that when you're walking around telling yourself you're hard to love? How does that feel?
Yeah.
Okay, how does this other one feel?
Yeah.
Right. And then it becomes, okay, I'm going to kind of, hitch my wagon to the story that feels okay in my body because that's the way to peace.
How hard is this? Because it sounds very easy. I mean, I know
Yeah,
we've done
I
it, but
know.
it's hard, right? This is hard stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a neurobiological level, what you're doing is rewiring your brain, and that is possible. And the more we study it, the more we realize how possible it is, which is even more than we ever thought. Possible doesn't mean easy, but I think it's really critical to understand that it's possible. You may have to tell your story to yourself every single day, 10 times a day. I was talking to a client actually yesterday where it was like, okay, I want you to pretend like you're playing whack-a-mole. Every time a fragment of the story that you're a failure is coming up, I want you to imagine smacking it down with this other thought and do that over and over and over again. And I think kind of like anything, right? When you start lifting weights in the beginning, it's the hardest. You have the biggest sort of hill to climb with that. But the more you do it, the easier it gets, the stronger you get, and then the more automatic it gets. Neurons that fire together wire together. So if you tell yourself a story, I'm divorced, therefore I'm a failure, you're sending a neuron from point A to point B over and over and over again. Over time, that connection between those two thoughts becomes titanium strong. So what we're doing in narrative therapy is we're pulling that story away from point B to point C. And you have to lay that groundwork just as sort of intensely as you did the first one in order for it to stick. But the reward is, I think, infinite.
Did I say that I loved you? Did I say that? I love this stuff. It's not just because it's not just bullshit talk. It's not just
No,
be
it's not. Yeah.
positive. Like there's
Right. Oh,
science
yeah,
behind
no.
this. This is real shit. Um, uh,
Absolutely. And as
uh,
you know, it matters that you take, this isn't like a, I'm a victim, I'm a hero binary, right?
right.
It's I'm a victim, I'm a victim. Okay, I don't want to live that way anymore. So
Yes.
let's fill out the story a little bit. Yes, something bad happened to me. Yes, there are ways in which I was perhaps responsible for some of those things. And there are ways in which this other person was responsible. And how do I kind of fill that all out so that I have a story that's actually true versus a story that's designed to keep me small?
And how is it like being an addict in a way where you may have to revisit your new story, your more I don't know, less biased towards negative story on a
Yeah.
somewhat regular basis? Like will you have to do this like a couple times a year at some point, or will it eventually get to the point where that connection, that neural pathway is solid and you won't have to continually try and remind yourself that you're an alcoholic or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the person and kind of what else is built into that story, where else it comes from, how long it's been rattling around in there. We are human beings are adaptive, and so we are designed in terms of our wiring to adapt to new stories. So when we ruminate, we haven't sort of habituated the new experience, the new reality. And so if you can break yourself, and rumination is compulsive, right? So there is that sort of like addictive model that we can look at it with. When you break out of rumination, then you open yourself up to habituate to a new story. And when you do that, eventually, hopefully, you wouldn't have to keep revisiting these things at some point. But it's
Right.
also totally normal 20 years later to be like, oh my God, now that I think of that weekend that we had that was so fraught,
Uh,
I completely understand that differently because our brain is constantly reconsolidating our memories based on new information. And so when you're in a new relationship, in fact, that happens a lot. When you're dating and you're in a new relationship, it kind of brings up all these old stories and you're like, oh my God, I thought I did all this healing work. You did. That's totally legit. And when you're dating someone new and you're kind of put back into situations that are similar, your brain is going to see that as an opportunity to like refile the memories. And so it will bring them back up. That's totally normal.
oh man, that's a can of fucking worms right there. Um, I want to shift the. I could. I, are you sure you got to go at 10? That's okay. I want to talk about a couple other things.
Yeah.
You brought up rumination. I do want to cover that, but one of the things that just hit me is healing. I hear this all the time, and
Yeah.
this is sort of a left turn. You know, healing takes time. Time heals all wounds, which I think is bullshit.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? What does time do for healing, and does it really truly heal? Because I hear this a lot, and I don't think it's true, but I want to get your take on
I started writing kind of a funny thing about this, which I wish it was finished because I could read it to you. We have the wrong frame on healing. Healing is not an arrival point. It's not a path. It's not this like journey that has an end where you end up triumphant at the top of a mountain. There's no summit. Healing is a way of life. And when you embrace that, it stops being painful, but it means you are infinitely making progress.
it.
And so I think sometimes I think the frame gets put on healing of like there's this linear path, you have to do this in a certain amount of time, time heals all wounds. I think that happens because there is an acute phase when something traumatic happens that is short. right? Like the word, you know this, you've lived it. The worst of the worst is its own chapter, right? Right after the thing happens, that can last for 6 months, it can last for a year. But then beyond that, you're not finished, and that's okay. In fact, that's a beautiful thing because it means you're growing continuously. We are constantly searching for, okay, I'm going to do 5 sessions of EMDR and then I'm going to be done. I'm going to get
Right.
ketamine delivered to my house and then I'm going to be done. I'm going to do an ayahuasca trip and then I'm going to be done. And it's like
Right.
those things can be part of your journey for sure, but please don't set yourself up for failure with the assumption that you do this and you will be done. That's not what living is.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we do, especially I shouldn't say especially. I feel like as a man, like there's always like a what do I need to do and how do I need to do it and how long is it going to take me? I feel
Yeah,
like
exactly.
we're doers, right? And I'm not
Right,
saying
right.
women aren't. I'm just saying for
No, no, I get
a,
it.
a large generalization here.
Mhm.
And so I think that's it gets us sort of stuck in this,
Mhm.
you said 6 months, a year, or whatever. There are some guys that it's a little longer, and they're going,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it's been 17 months, and I'm not. I
Right.
still can't listen to some song on the radio without crying. And I think
Mhm.
that it's unfortunate that we have this sort of narrow view, this sort of
Mhm.
limited view. But it's not helpful ultimately.
No.
I want to get back to rumination. So
Yeah.
a lot of guys struggle with this.
Wait, can I say one more thing about memory?
Yeah,
Sorry. Okay.
absolutely, of
I just want
course,
to kind of pepper this in because I think it's really
sure.
helpful in terms of your neurobiology and then it can help us with shame. Your memories all have emotional content. And so when those memories are invoked, and that could be because you hear a song in the grocery store, you eat a particular food that someone used to make, whatever, the memory file gets opened and the emotional content is there. And how is it there? Through felt sense, right? So you feel the sadness, you feel the ache, you feel the bittersweet memory, all of it. That does not mean you haven't healed. It means your memories are doing what memories are supposed to do. So I think if we understand that, then we can experience those moments as like a moment of, it's like almost like a visitation, right?
Right.
Like
Yes.
this emotion is visiting me, this ghost of this past relationship is visiting me, but I'm not going to then torture myself for the next 3 days wringing myself out and trying to figure out why I haven't healed. My memory is just doing what memory does. We don't have a problem when it's a joyful memory,
Right.
right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a matter of perspective in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Understanding and believing that memory is just visiting. I said this like 2 episodes ago on a
Oh,
solo
funny.
episode. Yeah. Because it is true. Almost anything you go through doesn't last, right? Nothing is perpetually the same, no matter what it
Right.
is, good,
Right.
bad, whatever.
Right.
And so then it's a matter of understanding that, and then going,
Yep.
okay, here this is. I'm having this moment, this
Mhm.
memory, this emotion, this feeling is visiting me, but
Mhm.
this is not where I am. This is
Exactly.
not, I'm not stationary. This is just where I am right now.
Right.
But boy, is that really hard. Why is that so
It's
damn hard?
because it's painful, right? Like divorce is one of these things, and I really think it's uniquely tender
Mm,
where it's a loss, but it's not a death. It's you lose a future with somebody, you lose versions of yourself. It's
mm,
you've got, file rooms full of memories with this person that you promised to spend the rest of your life with. Like it's a big deal. I think we minimize it a little bit. And so you can be completely, quote unquote, healed and moved on. You can be in a new marriage and
mm.
very happy with the way things turned out and be standing in the grocery store and hear a song from your wedding, from your first marriage, and and feel like someone just punched you in the gut. That's normal. It doesn't mean you don't like where you are. It doesn't mean you haven't
Yeah.
healed. It's just that this thing that we do with each other is tender.
Yeah. Yes. Let's go back to rumination a little bit and
Yeah.
because I know some guys they really get stuck in this and like I said I think I'm fortunate I don't really suffer from that too much. I mean it
Mhm.
happens, but it's not debilitating, but for some folks it is.
Yeah.
Can we maybe talk about the mechanism, like the what is happening inside this noggin when
Yeah.
rumination occurs?
Okay, two things. One, all of our memories, and this is the other reason why I got so obsessed with narrative therapy. Our memories are narrative in nature. Every memory that you have has a beginning, middle, and end. And if it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end, or if there's pieces missing, or if there's too much emotional content or not enough emotional content, we need to do some work to integrate the memory so that we can kind of put it away and it will look like most of the rest of the files in our file cabinet. So one of the reasons we ruminate is because we haven't figured out how to close the folder yet. And that can happen. That's very, very common in relationships that end because this idea of closure is just a mess, right? Like, what
Right.
does it even mean to have closure? What would that feel like? So we keep opening the memory, and the brain keeps opening the memory because we want to put it away. This is one of the places where narrative therapy can be so empowering because with a therapist, you can sit down and you can write the end of the story. You can write the pieces that are missing, the parts that you don't have anymore because maybe you don't have contact with that other person. And so you don't know why they did certain things. You can put something together so that your brain is satisfied with the content in the folder and can then put it away. The other thing that happens is has to do with the default mode network. Have you talked about this or in your podcast?
No,
Okay.
I haven't heard this one.
It's exciting. So this is neurobiology. So basically, and researchers, like they discover everything interesting, discovered this completely by accident, found that when subjects are at rest, there's like a couple of brain areas that kick up and sort of run. And the way that I think the best way to think about this is like, it's almost like you have a TV in your living room that's just always on and it's always playing Seinfeld 24/7. And when you're busy, let's say you're recording a podcast or you're on the phone or you're like reading something or you're making dinner, you're not going to be paying attention to the show, but it's still on. Those stories keep running and they keep running. And when things get quiet, all of a sudden, even if you haven't changed the volume dial, it feels like the TV got louder. And all of a sudden you turn, the sync off and you can hear Jerry's voice come through, right? The brain has a story that sort of runs through this default mode network about the self. And it's telling that story all the time, whether you're aware of it or not. So you can sit down at your desk in the morning and do morning pages or do some reflection in therapy. And then it's like you're tuning into the channel and figuring out what's on there. All the rest of the time, the default mode network is running. So we want to pay very close attention to what's going on that channel that's playing all the time. Because if you're telling yourself you're a failure at relationships, you're never going to find anybody again, right? That's the tape you're running 24/7 that's going to get very loud anytime you have silence. And then it sort of feels like it's torturing you, right? It gets so loud that you're like, you can't think about anything else. And so those are kind of the two reasons that we end up ruminating. You've got a story running in your default mode network, and it's just running, 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 and it's hard to shake that, which I can tell you how to do that in a second.
Yes.
Or because the memories need some work. So both of those things can be fixed. You don't have to get stuck in rumination, but I think the most important, and I think actually the hardest step to take is embracing and accepting that you can step out of rumination. Because as the like worrywart is my middle name, so I completely understand rumination and I understand the pull of the rumination and how compulsive it is. I also know that you can interrupt that. So like I mentioned before, if you can do some work in the memories with someone else, whether that's like a group, a divorce group that you're working with, a therapist, a good friend, that's great for your brain to kind of have the, I guess, opportunity to kind of put those folders down and stop reopening them and reopening them. And then the second thing is you can actually shake up the default mode network. And when you shake it up, it's sort of like resetting the TV and then changing the channel. And so there's various ways to do this, but one of the most tried and true ways of shaking up the default mode network is to experience awe. So, which I know that's wild, right? Because awe kind of, if you think about what happens when you see the northern lights or something, you go to some place you've never been and you're like, whoa, right? Your eyes get big, everything stops, and you're just like a sponge, like, oh, this is so cool. And so if you can sort of figure out ways, little ways to sort of drench yourself in awe, which feels very indirect because you're not doing any like direct healing, you're not talking about the divorce or whatever it is you're struggling with. But you are sort of giving your brain the opportunity to have a little bit of space. When you shake up the default mode network, you create more opportunity for neuroplasticity. So if you can experience awe and then return to therapy or your group, you'll be able to be a little bit more free to stop the rumination and kind of bring in another story.
The Northern Lights is something that doesn't like happen.
Right.
So I mean,
Mhm.
I know it's been happening lately, but I don't even know if I'm in Pennsylvania, so I don't know if it came down this way. But so
Yeah.
how, but what's a more practical way to sort of recreate that type of a state of mind?
So there's a million ways just to shout out. There's a book that came out, I think the beginning of this year, called Awe by Dacher Keltner, where he talks a lot about the brain science here and then how to kind of, and his own story, and then how to infuse your life with awe. I have a book coming out next year on joy, which has a whole section on awe and how to get awe in your everyday life. But it's easier than you think. So basically, the way that I would start, because we all have different interests and curiosities, is to
Sure.
think about the last time you experienced that.
Hmm.
And that might have been on vacation, that might have been in seeing the Northern Lights, it might have been something that's a once in a lifetime thing. But then that gives you information about the kinds of things that bring you awe.
Gotcha.
So actually, Dacher Keltner talks about, he gives 8 sources of everyday awe. And
Hmm.
one of them he calls, or is called, collective effervescence, which I love that term. But basically, it just is, like when you're at a sports game and
Hmm.
everyone is cheering because
Yeah.
it feels like this huge event, and like, or the wave comes through, or there's some, I don't watch sports. So like there's some sports ball thing that happens and everyone's like, woo, because they know what it means.
Right.
That collective experience of joy will shake up your default mode network. That's a source of awe. You can get it from nature. You can watch documentaries. You can, sometimes being around your kids gives you this experience of awe because you get to see the world through their eyes. And if they're seeing something for the first time, that's kind of amazing. Spirituality can give you the experience of awe.
Mm.
It's just going on a hike, like any of these things. Once you start, it's kind of we don't really value it in our culture. So it's like, what do you mean awe? But
Right.
once you start kind of cluing in, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, wait a second, hold on. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, it sounds like anytime you can kind of focus on something other than yourself that's
Mm-hmm.
mesmerizing maybe or
Yeah, or just that makes you like the physiological kind of proof of awe is when you tear up or when you have goosebumps,
oh.
right? Right. So like live music can do that.
Ted
You know,
Lasso does that for
Ted
me
Lasso, yes, 100%.
frequently.
Yep, yep, yep. I love that show.
Oh, me too.
There was a documentary called Fantastic Fungi. Did you see that?
I haven't seen it. I heard about it.
You should
People
watch
have told
that
me, yeah, I definitely got to.
because you're just like, whoa, the trees are talking to each other, like anything like that.
So one of the things that is can be tricky, I think, during these moments is
Mhm.
sort of distraction versus sort of leaning in and
Mm.
and doing work and stuff. So how much of that is, I mean, obviously good distraction and bad distraction would make a difference to this answer, but like how much distraction is too much? And I know that's sort of a nebulous kind of question, but like
No, I think it's a
is
really good one.
yeah, because we see it all the time, go to the gym, and I think that I agree with that statement, but for a lot of reasons, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of good that comes from that, but keep yourself occupied. Like it's
Mhm.
it's 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 one of the things that people recommend quite often, but I always sort of look at it kind of like, nah, I don't know, because I worry that that leads to complete and total distraction, and I'm not
Mhm.
sure like where's the line, or yeah, you know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah, and I think this actually comes up a lot, and I have really strong feelings about it. I think that we are much more worried about this than we need to be, but
Mm.
we need to set aside the issue of distraction in general in terms of like, did you read Stolen Focus? Like things like we are distracted by our technology in a way that we should really think about, but that has nothing to do with the question that you just asked. So I want to kind of
Right, right.
bracket that over here.
Yep.
Like you're number one, I think that it's important that we understand that our trauma cannot be powered through. So it's not the case that you can like sit down at your desk and just like do all the work, right? And then be ready and heal and all this stuff. And so sometimes I think that when we worry about distraction, it's because we want that to be true, and
Yeah.
it just isn't. And so once we understand that, trauma has to be processed the way that it comes, which is in waves. And you don't have to, those waves will just come. You don't have to like orchestrate that. Distraction is an incredibly important nervous system regulation tool. And this idea that we are adaptive is really important because we can be adaptive for good, or we can be adaptive for negative. I kind of don't want to say bad,
Right.
meaning we can adapt to terror, we can adapt to feeling awful, we can adapt to these stories that we tell about ourselves that are not true, which is any story that we're saying that we're not worthy of love, or that we're broken because we've been divorced or whatever. We want to be careful not to adapt to those stories, and one of the ways that we can resist that adaptation is by distracting ourselves from that pain, because our body and our nervous system wants to sort of rise to the occasion and just say, okay, this is the pain we're feeling. Cool. We'll just stay here. And then we're going to upregulate our nervous system and blood pressure. And that's why you feel so crap in your body. So, distraction is critical. How do you know when you're distracting too much? When you feel like your distraction is getting in the way. And so we can almost look at it as like a substance use disorder
Mm,
model, right? Where like, if you are watching so much Ted Lasso that you are not doing things that you love, that it's getting in the way of your work life, that it's getting in the way of your relationships with your kids, that's too much Ted Lasso.
yeah.
I would be willing to bet that you're not watching that much Ted Lasso, and that when you do watch
No.
Ted Lasso, the healing benefit is so enormous that what it is crowding out is okay.
I personal side note. So I've seen
Yeah,
the series probably 5, 6 times.
me too.
And I recently, well, not recently, this last go around, I've been watching it with my 15-year-old daughter,
Oh,
which
wow.
there's some adult themes clearly, but it's
Sure.
such a awesome bonding thing for us. Shit, I'm
Mhm.
gonna get emotional.
Mm.
Those are clearly good distractions.
Yeah.
But I worry, I guess maybe unnecessarily, not with her, but in terms of guys that are going through it. Are you
Mhm.
distracting yourself too much? I think the one distraction that can be dangerous is
Mhm.
dating when you're not ready, or
Yeah,
or
yeah,
too
yeah.
soon,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then you can fall back into something because it makes you feel good and soothes some wounds, but ultimately really doesn't, right? I mean, isn't that why
Yeah.
second divorces are 67% failure, I think.
Yeah, it's
um
like a 67 or like 75. It's really high. Yeah.
yeah. And do you see, have you seen that in your practice? Like, do you see that people jump into dating way too soon?
Okay, so this is going to maybe sound radical. I think we need to stop looking at relationship failures as failures, and understand that every time we have a relationship that ends, we have a critical lesson that we can take from it. And so, can you cause yourself more pain than necessary by jumping in too much too soon? Sure. Will you learn from that though? Absolutely.
Hmm.
So I think some people, you know, it might be too painful or too inaccessible for whatever reason to get the lesson that you need from your divorce. And so what you end up doing is jumping into a next relationship that falls apart. You get the lesson again. And I know that I don't mean that to sound flippant. I know that that can be incredibly painful.
Yeah.
But I think if we have this frame on it that like relationships are failures or successes, then we miss out on the adaptation work that we're doing. Your trauma will wait for you.
Hmm.
It will always be there for you to work on. So you don't have to be ready right now. You can date and distract yourself for a little while if that feels like it's important in some way.
Hmm.
That's I know controversial, but
Yeah, I controversial. I mean, it's certainly, I would be lying if I said, oh, I'm not surprised that you think
Mhm.
that way.
Okay, good.
But I do trust you. So, I mean, I'm 4.5 years, so I
Mhm.
can date, although I don't recommend it. It's a shit show of epic proportions. Um, uh, I don't know if it's dating apps or it's the times we are in, the dating apps being a part of that, the
Sure.
culture of just, well, you said this thing, so no, there's like six more lined up, and I don't know, it just feels very, I don't even know what the fucking word is. I mean, bad for sure, but there's just something just gross about the whole thing in a way.
Yeah, yeah. It's become
And
very transactional, and these apps
yes,
make it very inauthentic. And so I think add those two things together, and the odds of you like meeting someone and having an honest, authentic connection are pretty slim.
we were having this discussion. I have a book club. You came
Mm.
to one of our Discord meetings
Yep, yep.
once, and we have a book club, and we were discussing transactional relationships, and there
Mm-hmm.
there was a sort of consensus that all relationships are transactional. Do you think that's the case?
I no, I think it depends on what you mean by that. I think that there is a transactional nature to human relationships, but that doesn't mean that the relationship itself is transactional, right? So reciprocity, I think, is a better goal and word to to aim at. If I'm in a relationship with someone and I am giving them love, I think it's a fair expectation to receive love back, right? Is that a transaction? I mean, you could boil it down to individual interactions that we have and tabulate it out that way. But I think the harm of looking at relationships as transactional is that you boil down the whole of the relationship into each transaction. And that's where you get this like inability to give someone the benefit of the doubt. You said this one thing, so now we're not friends anymore, like that kind of thing, which I think is pretty destructive. Does that answer
Hmm.
the question?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I could listen to you talk all day long, seriously. Um, but we don't have all day. So I'm gonna ask you or talk about
Yes.
I got one last question, of course, the last one, but I want to talk about, first of all, I want to say, I know I've said it plenty of times and I'll say it again. How much I adore you. You're an amazing
Oh, thank
person.
you.
And I
Thank you.
loved your book. I'm getting emotional thinking about it because I
Oh.
messaged you. I was on an airplane reading chapter 7, if I remember correctly, and that's the one with your I don't want to give any spoilers, but
Yeah,
that's the one with
yeah.
your mom, right?
Yep, yep, yep.
Oh my God, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it was amazing. I mean, what a great I mean, I've recommended it before to these guys,
Oh, thank you.
and I'm going to recommend it again. So I'm sure it's probably Amazon and all that kind of good stuff, but where can
Yeah.
they find your book?
Yep. So it's called Unbroken. The Trauma Response is Never Wrong, and it is available wherever you buy your fine books. So that's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your favorite local indie bookstore can have it or order it if they don't. And yeah.
Okay. And then you're also, if I read correctly
Mhm.
yesterday, I think you're starting a new podcast.
Yes, it just launched last week. It's called Keep Grief Weird. I have a couple of others in that are getting ready. That's
Oh,
with my friend Tracy Benjamin, and we are talking about the goal there is to create a space where we can actually look at and talk about loss because, as you know, we live in a grief phobic culture, and that makes
hmm.
grieving a lot harder than it needs to be.
And is the trauma tapes coming back, or if you put that on hiatus?
It's on high. It's on. So the trauma tapes will not be coming back, but two things are happening. One, people can write me a letter. They can ask me for advice on my website, and I will write them and then record a response on my Substack, which is
Okay.
called Dr. Sunshine. And then I'm starting another podcast that is kind of based in joy, but we'll still be talking about trauma as well, because I think the two are more entangled than we think.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I could talk to you all day. The last question, as you know, I think, is what
Yes.
words of wisdom would you impart to a man just beginning his divorce journey?
The short version is if you can just hold on, your life is going to get so much bigger. The long version is please be kind to yourself and don't go to war with the emotions that come up because you're creating suffering where suffering doesn't need to be. Let the emotions hit you and let them hit you and know that they're not going to take you out. Can I read you a poem really quickly?
I would love it. Yes, please.
This is, it's called The Guest House by Rumi. And this was very critical for me in my own divorce process. In fact, I have it on the wall right there.
Yeah.
Hold on. But it's about this idea about emotions and letting them kind of happen. Okay. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
That's beautiful.
I try to think about my emotions literally coming to the front door. Am I always happy to see them? Absolutely not. But I think, okay, here we are. What do we got? Come in, sit down at the dining room table. Do you want some tea? What do you have to say?
And how long would you say that it took you to sort of be able to do that and be comfortable with emotions?
Oh man, like 40 years? No. I mean, I think as soon as I had that cognitive framing on it, it got a lot easier because it was like, okay, the thing that's causing you the pain is going to war with the emotion, not the emotion itself.
Mm.
And so it was like, all right, so then we need to stop going to war. Do I feel pulled to do that? Of course. But what else can we do? And then just kind of having this, I think it helps to have a visual, having a softer visual around sort of receiving your emotions can really change the way that they feel for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. You mentioned earlier website. What is the website where people can find you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok at mc.phd, and my website is alchemycoaching.life.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you so much for watching and/or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.